I didn't realize how quietly distance could grow between two people until it became the only thing I felt in my own home. Conversations that once carried warmth now felt like passing comments made out of habit, nothing more. He would walk in, ask the same routine questions, and walk out again with his attention glued to a glowing screen. I used to wait for moments with him. Lately, I had begun to wait for them to be over. It was subtle, unspoken, a slow erosion of something I couldn't admit was fading, and in the middle of that numbness, I found myself talking to someone who wasn't supposed to matter. At first, it was harmless, simple messages, light exchanges, nothing with weight. But he had a startling way of noticing things my own partner overlooked. A shift in my tone. Pause between my words. A sigh I didn't know I typed. He asked how I truly felt, not out of obligation, but with a sincerity that disarmed me. I answered him because someone finally felt like they wanted to hear the truth. That it surprised me how natural it became, how easily I fell into those conversations. He didn't try to charm me. He simply gave me space to be honest. I told myself it was just a distraction, something to fill quiet hours, nothing meaningful. But meaning crept in when I wasn't paying attention. His messages became something I expected, something I checked for before checking anything else. When he complimented me, it didn't feel rehearsed or exaggerated. It felt like someone seeing a part of me that had gone unnoticed for too long. I tried to ignore the way my heart responded, the involuntary pull toward someone I barely knew outside words. But the pull grew. And the worst part was that I didn't fight it. Not really. I told myself I was allowed to feel appreciated, allowed to feel wanted even if only emotionally. That small lie became the foundation of something I wasn't prepared to confront. He started asking deeper questions. What I feared, what I wanted, what I missed. The kind of questions my partner never asked anymore. I answered cautiously at first, revealing only small pieces, but every time he responded with understanding rather than judgment, I found myself offering more. There was no face to attach to his voice, no physical closeness to blame, just a connection that shouldn't have meant anything but somehow meant too much. The shift happened the night he told me he wanted to see a part of me nobody else ever took seriously, not physically but personally. He wanted me to show him what I hid from everyone, what I never voiced, what I kept tucked away because it never seemed important to anyone else. I didn't know why his request made my breath catch, but it did. It was bold, unexpected, and for a moment I almost refused. But then I remembered how invisible I had felt for months, how my partner barely noticed when I tried to open up. And here was someone asking, genuinely asking, to know me beyond the surface. That I hesitated. Knowing the line I was approaching wasn't emotional anymore but moral. And yet, something in me whispered that I needed to be seen, even if only for a moment. I told him I would show him exactly what he was asking for. Not something physical, but something I had never shared with anyone. I didn't realize then how much that choice would change everything that followed. I didn't expect that opening up to him would feel like handing someone the key to a locked room inside me. I told myself it was harmless, that sharing pieces of my mind wasn't crossing any real boundary. But the way he listened made every word feel heavier than it should have. When I sent him the first long message, pages of thoughts I had scribbled years ago and never dared to voice, there was a pause before he replied. Not the kind of pause that comes from distraction, but one that felt deliberate, like he was taking in every line carefully. His response caught me off guard. He didn't flatter or dramatize, he simply understood. He pointed out the parts where my fear seeped through, the places where I'd been hiding pain behind polite silence, and he told me it made sense. No one had ever said that to me, not even the person I lived with. It was strange how validation from someone almost distant felt more intimate than anything familiar at home. From that moment, our conversations changed. I stopped filtering myself. I told him things I'd never admitted out loud, how loneliness doesn't always come from being alone, how silence can feel louder when shared with the wrong person, how I'd forgotten the version of myself that used to laugh without forcing it. He responded with honesty that left me exposed in a way I didn't fear. It felt safe, almost too safe. He began sharing his own vulnerabilities too, not to mirror mine, but to meet me where I stood emotionally. With every exchange, the distance between us grew shorter, even if we never saw each other's faces. The anonymity made it easier to be real. There was no performance, no pressure. Just two voices finding each other in the empty spaces of their lives. Meanwhile, the atmosphere at home remained unchanged. My partner didn't notice the shift in me. The late-night typing, the brief smiles at my phone, the newfound spark in my tone. Or maybe he noticed and didn't care enough to ask. Either way, the silence between us stayed as thick as ever. I realized I had stopped waiting for him to ask how I felt. Someone else already was. He asked me one evening if he could hear me instead of just reading me. His wording wasn't demanding. It felt like curiosity mixed with something deeper. I hesitated. A voice call felt more personal, more revealing. But I also knew he had already seen sides of me no one else ever had. My voice wouldn't expose anything he hadn't already sensed. When I finally agreed, I kept everything faceless. No camera, no images, just the sound of breath and words filling the space between us. He didn't comment on my voice the way I expected. He focused on what I said. I read him another entry from my old journal, my voice shaking slightly. He listened with a quiet intensity that made me feel more present with him than I had felt with my partner in months. That night, he told me he wanted to understand me on a level deeper than words on a screen. Not physically, not visually, emotionally. He wanted to know what I hid behind my calmness, what I refused to admit even to myself. I felt the line blurring again, but I didn't step back. I let him in because part of me had already crossed over without noticing. By the time we ended the call, I knew this wasn't just harmless connection anymore. I had shown him a part of myself that I couldn't take back, and the way he held those pieces made me feel seen and guilty at the same time. I also knew he wanted more, not more of my body but more of my truth. And I wasn't sure how long I could keep giving without something breaking. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope between two worlds. On one side was the life I was obligated to, familiar but hollow. On the other was the connection I had built with him. Unexpected, quietly consuming, and far more intimate than anything I had shared at home in years. I kept telling myself I was still in control, that I could stop anytime I wanted, but every time his name appeared on my screen, my resolve dissolved before it even formed. He started noticing the subtle shifts in my tone more than anyone ever had. If I sounded tired, he asked why. If I paused too long, he waited until I spoke again. My partner, meanwhile, barely glanced up from his routine. The contrast wasn't just noticeable. It was impossible to ignore. And that contrast made every conversation with him feel even more significant. One evening, he asked me if I was truly happy. I should have answered quickly, with the rehearsed phrases I always used. But the question lodged itself in my chest. Instead of answering directly, I asked him why he wanted to know. His reply was simple. He could hear something breaking in my voice. That alone almost shattered me. I didn't admit I wasn't happy. I didn't have to. The silence between us said enough. And he didn't push, which somehow made it harder to resist him. He respected every boundary I didn't even have the strength to reinforce. He didn't ask for anything physical, never demanded anything beyond my truth. But sometimes truth is more intimate than anything else. Around this time, the tension at home shifted slightly. My partner began noticing small things, my late nights, my sudden habit of stepping outside to take calls, the way I guarded my phone. But instead of asking why, he only made passing comments, half jokes that weren't really jokes. It was as if he sensed something was slipping but didn't have the interest or energy to pull it back. The indifference stung far more than jealousy ever could. One night, the risk nearly caught up with me. I was talking to him on a voice call, my phone close, my voice low. I was telling him about a fear I had never confessed to anyone. Not about love, not about life, but about losing myself slowly over time. He listened quietly, the kind of quiet that encourages you to keep speaking. And just when I was about to tell him something even deeper, I heard footsteps in the hallway. My heart raced. I muted myself instantly, barely breathing. My partner opened the door, glanced around, asked a half-hearted question about whether I'd seen his charger, and left without noticing the tension in the air. But the moment he closed the door, the reality of what I was doing flooded me. I wasn't just talking to someone. I was hiding someone. When I unmuted the call, he didn't tease or pry. He simply said he understood and that I didn't have to explain. That understanding was the exact thing I should have been resisting. Yet it pulled me closer instead. I couldn't deny it anymore. He knew me in a way my partner never had. He heard the things I didn't say, felt the emotions I tried to suppress, and held space for thoughts I never thought I'd share. And the more he understood me, the harder it became to imagine going back to the emotional emptiness I had accepted as normal. By the end of that night, I realized I had stepped beyond the line I thought I could control. Not with touch or images, but with trust, with honesty, with the parts of myself I had never allowed anyone to see. And once you give someone that kind of access, you can't pretend it means nothing anymore. The weight of everything finally settled the morning I woke up and realized I was checking for his message before I even looked at the person sleeping beside me. It wasn't just a habit anymore, it was instinct. I had built a second life inside my phone, one made of words, late-night confessions, and emotional closeness that should have belonged to the relationship I had promised myself to. And yet, I didn't feel the guilt I expected. What I felt was fear of how far I had drifted without noticing. He sensed it in me even before I admitted it. When he called, his voice carried a softness I wasn't prepared for. He told me he didn't want to be the reason my life became complicated. But he also couldn't pretend our connection meant nothing. Hearing him say those words out loud made everything real. I stayed silent for a long moment, unsure how to respond. I didn't want to lose him, but I also couldn't keep pretending that this was sustainable. Meanwhile, at home, things felt even more strained. My partner began to pick up on my emotional distance. Though he didn't confront me directly, he watched me differently. Not with suspicion, but with a vague confusion, as if he was trying to understand when I had become someone he no longer recognized. For the first time in months, he asked me if something was wrong. And for the first time in years, I didn't know how to lie convincingly. I tried to pull myself away from the man who had become my refuge. I reduced the messages, delayed the replies, shortened the calls. But every time I distanced myself, it only highlighted the emptiness waiting for me at home. My partner's sudden attempts to reconnect felt forced, arriving too late, lacking the depth I had already tasted elsewhere. I wasn't angry at him, but I couldn't deny the truth anymore. I had been starving for emotional presence, and someone else had fed that hunger without even touching me. One night, he asked me plainly whether I wanted to stay in the life I had or build something different. He didn't pressure me. He wasn't asking for a decision in his favor. He was asking because he didn't want my silence to become regret years later. His voice carried sincerity that shook me more than any confession could. I realized then that this wasn't about choosing him, it was about choosing myself, the person I had buried under routine and disregard. But choosing myself didn't mean choosing him either. It meant acknowledging that I had crossed into a place I wasn't prepared to live in long term. I couldn't keep sharing the most vulnerable parts of me with someone I wasn't willing to build a future with. And I couldn't keep waiting for my partner to become someone he wasn't. The decision wasn't dramatic or loud. It happened quietly, in the middle of a long exhale. I told him I needed to step back, not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much to let this become a chain around both our lives. He didn't fight me. He simply said he understood, that he was grateful for every truth I trusted him with, and that if I ever needed a voice that listened without judgment, he would be there. Not waiting, just there. Ending things didn't erase the connection. It didn't undo the emotional intimacy we had shared. But it forced me to confront the truth I had been avoiding. The problem wasn't him. It wasn't even the emotional affair. It was the reality that I had been absent in my own life long before he entered it. I didn't fix everything overnight. My partner and I still moved like strangers for a while. But I began having conversations I had avoided for years, not because I wanted to save something, but because I wanted clarity. And for the first time I spoke honestly, not to spark jealousy, not to confess, but to express the loneliness I had been carrying. What happened next didn't shock anyone but me. He listened. Maybe not as deeply as the man who had held my truths before, but enough to open a door that had been locked for too long. In the end, I didn't stay for him or leave for someone else. I simply chose the version of myself that refused to disappear again. And though I let go of the person who saw me first, I'll never forget the moment I realized being seen wasn't the same as being saved.